Nation, South Africa. From apartheid to democracy. Why the Rainbow Nation still struggles. This is Sandton, the richest square mile on the African continent. Glass towers, private wealth managers, Africa's largest stock exchange, and this is 15 minutes away. Same city, same country. A different world where more than 1 in 3 adults has no job, and the walls of a shack still trace lines drawn by a government that fell over 30 years ago. South Africa ended one of history's most notorious systems of racial rule. It wrote one of the world's most admired constitutions. So why is it still one of the most unequal societies ever measured? The answer isn't simple, and it isn't over. Before the colonizers, to understand today, forget the myth that this land was empty. It wasn't. For over 1,000 years, the Khoisan hunted and herded across the Cape. Then Bantu-speaking farmers moved south, bringing iron, cattle, and cities. At Mapungubwe, a kingdom traded gold and ivory with merchants from as far as India and China, centuries before any European set foot here. This was not a blank map waiting to be filled. It was a settled, governed, connected world. Remember that because the lie that it was empty would later be used to justify taking it. The colonizers arrive. In 1652, the Dutch East India Company built a supply station at the Cape not to conquer, but to feed ships rounding Africa toward the spice trade. But a garden needs land. And land needs labor. Settlers pushed inland, colliding with the Khoisan and the Xhosa in a century of frontier wars. Britain seized the Cape in 1806. When it abolished slavery, thousands of Dutch-descended farmers, the Boers, trekked north to found their own republics, fighting the Zulu Kingdom and eventually the British Empire itself in 2 brutal wars. Strip away the flags, and every one of these conflicts was about the same 3 things: land, labor, and who holds power. That triangle still defines South Africa. Diamonds, gold, and a new kind of country. Then, everything changed. Diamonds at Kimberley in 1867, gold on the Witwatersrand in 1886, the richest gold field the world had ever seen. Overnight, a farming backwater became an industrial powerhouse. Johannesburg rose from empty veld. But deep mines needed cheap, controllable labor on a massive scale. So a system was engineered. Black workers recruited from distant reserves, housed in fenced compounds, forced to carry passes, paid a fraction of white wages, and sent home when the work was done. This is the hinge of the whole story. The mines didn't just make South Africa rich, they built the machinery of racial control. Migrant labor, passed laws, and a color bar reserving skilled jobs for whites. Many historians argue apartheid wasn't born from ideology alone. It was born from what was profitable. The long road to apartheid. Here's what most people get wrong. Apartheid didn't begin in 1948. The scaffolding was decades old. In 1910, Britain united its colonies into the Union of South Africa and handed political power to the white minority, shutting out the black majority. Then, in 1913, the Natives Land Act. With a single law, the black majority was barred from owning land across roughly 90% of the country. Millions of families were pushed onto crowded reserves, the single most important act of dispossession in modern South African history. Passed laws, segregated schools, job color bars, piece by piece. Segregation was already law. The 1948 election didn't invent this system. It perfected it. Apartheid, a system of total control. In 1948, the National Party won on one word: apartheid, apartness. Backed by Afrikaner nationalism, itself forged in the poverty and humiliation of the Boer War, they promised to protect a white minority by legislating separation into every corner of life. The Population Registration Act sorted every person by race. The Group Areas Act decided where you could live, bulldozing thriving mixed neighborhoods like District 6 and Sophiatown. 10 homelands were invented to strip black South Africans of citizenship in their own country. And Bantu education, in the words of its own architect, was designed to train black children only for labor. Apartheid was not just separate benches. It was a machine, economic, geographic, and psychological, built to make inequality permanent and to make it feel normal. Resistance and a continent that answered, but control breeds resistance. The African National Congress, the Pan-Africanist Congress, and a generation of leaders, Mandela, Tambo, Sisulu, and later Steve Biko, and Chris Hani, organized, marched, and, when peaceful protest was crushed at Sharpeville, took up arms. The state responded with bannings, torture, and prison. Mandela would spend 27 years behind bars. Biko was killed in police custody. Then, in 1976, the children of Soweto rose against being taught in the language of their
language. Fast forward to today, every few years, South Africa makes global headlines, not for its economy or democracy, but for violence against African migrants. Zimbabwean, Nigerians, Somalis, Ethiopians, Mozambicans, Ghanaians. People who came searching for opportunity suddenly become targets. But why does this keep happening? The answer isn't simply hatred of foreigners. It's frustration. South Africa has one of the highest unemployment rates in the world, with youth unemployment affecting more than half of young people. Despite being Africa's most industrialized economy, millions still live in poverty. Many townships suffer from poor housing, unreliable public services, high crime, and limited economic opportunities. When jobs are scarce and living conditions worsen, immigrants are often blamed for problems they didn't create. Foreign-owned businesses are accused of taking jobs or undercutting local prices, even though many simply fill gaps in the economy by opening shops where others won't. Economic hardship becomes anger, and anger becomes violence. To understand today's crisis, you have to look at history. Apartheid officially ended in 1994. But political freedom did not erase economic inequality. The apartheid system left South Africa with one of the world's most unequal societies. Land ownership remains highly concentrated. Education quality varies dramatically. Many black South Africans were excluded from wealth creation for generations, and those effects are still visible today. Economic growth has also slowed over the past decade. Power shortages, corruption scandals, weak public institutions, and low investment have reduced job creation. As poverty deepens, politicians and criminal groups sometimes exploit anti-immigrant sentiment, making foreigners convenient scapegoats instead of addressing structural problems. The tragedy is that both South Africans and many African migrants are victims of the same challenges. Unemployment, inequality, weak economic growth, failed governance. Xenophobic violence may target foreigners, but it doesn't solve poverty. The real battle isn't between Africans from different countries. It's against the economic and political systems that continue to leave millions behind.